Okay, hiccup's gone, I hope. Basically, um, I don't need you to understand how these things worked, these pre Edison recording devices. Um, the ones I've just told you about, you don't need to remember the name of the person who did it. I just want you to know that before Edison came around, that there were devices. Um, it wasn't music like you're used to hearing music. It was very tinny and artificial sounding. All right, so we move to 8, acoustical recording technology. So now we're up to Edison in 1877. It was not, this is the important thing to remember, write this down in your notes. It was not originally intended for music. No, Edison was very smart. He recorded on a metal cylinder format, and the earliest uses thought to be for dictation and other business needs. How do you like that? The neat thing is, you don't have to hire a stenographer. A lot of the inventors were thinking about how can somebody use this in their business without having to hire an employee to do this. It it happens as you're speaking. As you're speaking, the dictation, it's recording. Um, Slide 9. The phonograph used tin foil or wax cylinders recorded by speaking into a megaphone. This I would like you to understand. Mixing was done by the placement of musicians. Let me explain a little thing about mixing. And if you're into music, perhaps you understand what mixing is. Let's say today we record the different instruments. We record bass separate from tenor. And then what happens is the mixer comes in and he plays them all together and he says, no, the bass is sounding too loud. I'm going to lower the volume of the bass. Now we'll put it together. Okay, that's sounding really good. I think we need to raise the soprano a little bit. There's somebody singing soprano. I can't quite hear her, so we're going to raise that volume. And they mix these new versions into one record, one recording. So in those days, they couldn't do it that way. So if they knew, let's say Edison had an orchestra of 30 people, and he didn't want the bass to be really loud. He'd put the bass instruments towards the back of the room, and those things he wanted to sound louder on the recording, he'd bring them to the front of the room, and he would have his recording devices lined up in front, maybe more than one recording device. So this was done with tin foil on or wax cylinders. Now we move on. So that was, we saw his first phonograph in 1877. The next year, he was granted the patent for a phonograph he developed the year before, which used the cylinders wrapped with tin foil. It had a 2 to 3 minute capacity, which is kind of funny when you think about it, because in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, when we used what we call 45s, those were our smaller records. They if you bought, let's say, an Elvis Presley song on a 45, the song was going to be somewhere between 2.5 and 3 minutes. That's what the rock songs were. So it's kind of interesting that this had a capacity for a 2 to 3 minute recording. Now, this is one of his early phonographs. I think It was a hand cranked machine. I'm not going to go into this, so you can sort of forget about how it actually worked per se. This was a close up of the grooves. The phonograph was recording on tin foil, kind of interesting. Edison held a monopoly in the recording industry for 9 years until telephone pioneer Alexander Graham Bell, along with inventor Charles Tainter, invented the improved audio recording device into something called the graphophone. So we go from a gramophone to a graphophone, which used beeswax rather than tin foil. People experimented. They wanted to find the best material on which to record. So we go to 14 and we have an interesting picture here. I always think it's interesting to see what did somebody's office or lab look like. Well, this was Edison's music room between 1890 and 1893. He had a drum on the floor. He was, look at this, he had a piano right there. He had another piano right there. These cylinders, these were what you would speak into, that sort of thing. Just wanted you to see what it looked like. Now, this was the early recording. Here's, I'm going to play you the Liberty Bell March by the Edison Concert Band, recorded in 1897 with a 13-horn system. He put 13 horns together. Now I'm going to try to get this on. I hope it's loud enough. Okay, it's 2 minutes and 44 seconds. Here we go. I'm not going to play the whole thing. Okay, that's over. You can hear how scratchy it is, but imagine hearing that for the first time, thinking, gosh, I wasn't there when they played that, but here I am the next day and I'm listening to it. Quite a wonderful thing. Now we're on slide 16. So in 1878, which was the year after he invented it, it was the year he patented it. Shortly after inventing his phonograph, Thomas Edison created a top 10 list of uses of the phonograph. And number 10 was this. These men were brilliant, and women. They could see ahead. He says, connection with the telephone so as to make that instrument an auxiliary in the transmission of permanent and invaluable records, instead of being the recipient of momentary and fleeting communication. This was voicemail that he predicted. He thought, wow, somebody can call and actually leave a message. It was truly wonderful that he even had this idea of how to use it. So I always like to say that, you know, the people, it's whatever the people want. Consumerism wins out. This is an ad. Thomas Edison was a great inventor. but he was also a great marketer. And you're going to see in future developments why somebody like person A's um, invention made it, but person B's invention didn't make it. Why did Sony lose out to um, Sony? I'm thinking of the um, videotape recording. Lost out to the quote, IBM version. Why did Mac lose out? Macintosh computers versus the IBM compatible. Why did that happen? Mac ended up with 5%, and Bill Gates ended up with 95%. Okay, so we'll talk about those things. But this is the ad that Thomas Edison placed. It says, "I want to see a phonograph in every American home." Yeah, this would have made him a pretty wealthy guy, right? It's the new Edison, Thomas Edison's final achievement. They were too early in predicting that. He wasn't over until it was over. But anyway, he knew how to market himself and market his devices. We go on to 18. So now we've done tinfoil, we've done beeswax. Now we've got more wax and shellac discs. The first phonographs had one disadvantage. The recordings could not be duplicated. You could play that one recording over and over and over again, but you couldn't duplicate the actual record. In 1894, Emil Berliner, I want you to remember him, modified the phonograph to use a disc rather than a cylinder. And this is him in about 1890. Okay, so he's sitting there with his pencil and his blank piece of paper. What can I do to make this device better? What can I do to make these recordings in greater quantity? How can I reproduce them? So we go on to 19, and this had to do with wax and shellac discs. Now you see this looks like an old-timey phonograph, but you see the stylus, the needle, and when you have this, looks like a 45, it's small, that spins around, and the needle moves through the grooves as this thing goes around. So this allowed mass production of records by stamping them out into a hard rubber material. Berliner's disc recorder, the Victor Talking Machine Company, also launched the gramophone. All right, we'll continue in a minute.